Best of Luck, How a Fighting Kentuckian Won the Thanks of Britain's King by Alexander McClintock, DCM, Late Sergeant 87th Battalion Canadian Grenadier Guards. Chapter 3, Over the Top and Give 'em Hell. As we climbed out of the shelter of our trenches for my first, and perhaps my last, I thought, adventure in no man's land, the word was passed. Over the top and give 'em hell. That is the British Tommy's battle cry as they charge the enemy, and is often sounded up and down those long lines in western France as the British, Canadian, and Australian soldiers go out to fight and to the death. We were divided into 6 parties of 10 men, each party having separate duties to perform. We crouched forward, moving slowly in single file, stumbling into shell holes and over dead men, some very long dead, and managing to keep in touch with each other, though the machine gun bullets began to drop men almost immediately. Once we started, we were neither fearful nor rattled. We had been drilled so long and so carefully that each man knew just what he has to do, and he kept right on doing it unless he got hit. To me, it seemed the ground was moving back under me. The first 10 yards were the toughest. The thing was perfectly organized. Our last party of 10 was composed of signalers. They were paying out wires and carrying telephones to be used during the 15 minutes of our stay in the German trenches, and communicating with our battalion headquarters. The telephone code had been arranged using the names of our commanding officers as symbols. Rexford 1 meant first prisoners being sent back. Rexford 2 meant our first wounded being sent over. Rexford 3 meant we have entered German trench. The code was very complete, and the signalers had been drilled in it for a week. In case the telephone lines were cut, the signalers were to send messages back by the use of rifle grenades. These are rifle projectiles which carry little metal cylinders that contain written messages, and which burst into the flame when they strike the earth, so they can easily be found at night. The officer in charge of the signalers was to remain at the point of entrance with his eyes on his watch. It was his duty to sound a warning signal 5 minutes before the end of our time in the German trenches. The leader of every party of 10 also had a whistle with which to repeat the warning blast and then the final blast, when each man was to drop everything and get back of our artillery fire. We were not to leave any dead or wounded in the German trench on account of the information which the Germans might thus obtain. Before starting on the raid, we had removed all marks from our persons, including even our identification discs. Except for the signalers, each party of 10 was similarly organized. First, there were 2 bayonet men, each with an electric flashlight attached to his rifle, so as to give light for the direction of a bayonet thrust, and controlled by a button at the left-hand grasp of the rifle. Besides his rifle, each of these men carried 6 or 8 Mills No. 5 hand grenades, weighing from 1 pound and 5 ounces to 1 pound and 7 ounces each. These grenades are shaped like turkey eggs, but slightly larger. Upon withdrawing the firing pin, a lever sets a 4-second fuse going. One of these grenades will clean out anything living in a 10-foot trench section. It will also kill the man throwing it if he holds it more than 4 seconds after he's pulled the pin. The third man of each 10 was an expert bomb thrower, equipped as lightly as possible to give him freedom of action. He carried a few bombs himself, but the main supply was carried by a 4th man who was not to throw any unless the 3rd man became a casualty, in which case number 4 was to take his place. The 3rd man also carried a knob carry, a heavy bludgeon to be used in whacking an enemy over the head. The kind we used was made by fastening a heavy steel nut on a stock stick of wood, a very businesslike contrivance. The 4th man, or bomb carrier, besides having a large supply of Mills grenades, had smoke bombs to be used in smoking the Germans out of dugouts and later, if necessary, in covering our retreat, and also fumite bombs. The latter are very dangerous to handle. They contain a mixture of petrol and phosphorus and weigh 3 pounds each. On exploding, they release a liquid fire which will burn through steel. The 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th in line were called utility men. They were to take the places of any of the first 4 who might become casualties. In addition, they carried 2 Stokes gun bombs each. These weigh 9 pounds apiece, have 6-second fuses, and can be used in wrecking dugouts. The 9th and 10th men were sappers carrying slabs of gun cotton and several hundred yards of instantaneous fuse. This explosive is used in demolishing machine gun emplacements and mine saps. The sappers were to lay their charges while we were at work in the trenches and explode them as soon as our party was far enough out on the return journey to be safe from this danger. In addition to these parties of 10, there were 3 of us who carried bombs and had orders to keep near the 3 officers, to take the place of any one of them that might go down, and meanwhile to use our own judgment about helping the jolly old party along. I was one of the 3. In addition to the raiding party proper, there was a relay all across no man's land at 10 paces interval, making a human chain to show us our way back to assist the wounded in a case of opportunity or necessity to reinforce us. They were ordered not to leave their positions when we began to come back until the last man of our party had been accounted for. The final section of our entourage was composed of 12 stretcher bearers who had been specially trained with us so they would be familiar with the trench section which we were to raid. There were two things which made it possible for our raiding party to get started across no man's land. One was the momentary quickening of the blood which follows a big and unaccustomed dose of rum, and the other was a sort of subconscious mechanical confidence in our undertaking, which was a result of the scores of times we had gone through every prearranged movement in the duplicate German trenches behind our lines. Without either of those influences, we simply could not have left shelter and faced what was before us. An intensified bombardment from our guns began just as soon as we climbed over the top, and were lining up for the journey across. Lining up is not just a suitable term. We were crawling about on all fours just far enough out in no man's land to be under the edge of the German shell fire and taking what shelter we could in shell holes, while our leaders picked the way to start across. The extra heavy bombardment had warned the Germans that something was about to happen. They sent up star shells and SOS signals until there was a glare over the torn earth like that which you see at a grand finish of a Payne's fireworks display. And meanwhile they sprayed no man's land with streams of machine gun fire. In the face of that, we started. It would be absurd to say that we were not frightened. Thinking men cannot help but be afraid. If we were pallid, which undoubtedly we were, the black upon our faces hid it. But our fear-struck voices were not disguised. They trembled and our teeth chattered. We sneaked out single file, making our way from shell hole to shell hole nearly all the time on all fours, crawling quickly over the flat places between holes. The Germans had not sighted us, but they were squirting machine gun bullets all over the place like a man watering a lawn with a garden hose, and they were bound to get some of us. Behind me I heard cries of pain and groans, but this made little impression on my benumbed intelligence. From the mere fact that whatever had happened to one of the other sections of 10 and not my own, it seemed some way or another no affair to concern me. Then a man in front of me doubled up suddenly and rolled into a shell hole. That simply made me remember very clearly that I was not to stop on account of it. It was someone else's business to pick that man up. Next, according to the queer psychology of battle, I began to lose my sensation of fear and nervousness. After I saw a second man go down, I gave my attention principally to a consideration of the irregularities of the German parapet ahead of us, picking out the spot where we were to enter the trench. It seems silly to say it, but I seemed to get some sort of satisfaction out of the realization that we had lost the percentage which we might be expected to lose going over. Now it seemed the rest of us were safe until we should reach the next phase of our undertaking. I heard directions given, and I gave some myself. My voice was firm, and I felt almost calm. Our artillery had so torn up the German barbed wire that it gave us no trouble at all. We walked through it with only a few scratches. When we reached the low sandbag parapet of the enemy trench, we tossed in a few bombs and followed them right over as soon as they had exploded. There wasn't a German in sight. They were all in their dugouts. But we knew pretty well where every dugout was located, and we rushed for the entrances with our bombs. Everything seemed to be going just as we expected to go. 2 Germans ran plump into me as I rounded a ditch angle with a bomb in my hand. They had their hands up and each of them yelled, "Mercy, camarade!" I passed them back to be sent to the rear, and the man who received them from me chuckled and told me to step lively. The German trenches were practically just as we had expected to find them, according to our sample. They were so nearly similar to the duplicate section in which we had practiced. We had no trouble finding our way in them. I was just thinking that really the only tough part of the job remaining would be getting back across no man's land, when it seemed that the whole earth behind me rose in the air. For a moment I was stunned and half blinded by dirt blowing in my face. When I was able to see, I discovered that all that lay back of me was a mass of upturned rock and earth, with here and there a man shaking himself or scrambling out of it or lying still. Just 2 minutes after we went into the trench, the Germans had exploded a mine under their parapet. I've always believed that in some way or another they had learned which spot we were to raid and had prepared for us. Whether that's true or not, one thing is certain: that mine blew our organization, as we would say in Kentucky, plumb to hell, and it killed or disabled more than half of our party. There was much confusion among those of us who remained on our feet. Someone gave an order to retire, and someone countermanded it. More Germans came out of the dugouts, but instead of surrendering as per our original schedule, they threw bombs among us. It became apparent that we should be killed or captured if we stuck there, and that we shouldn't get any more prisoners. I looked at my wristwatch and saw that there remained but 5 minutes more of the time which had been allotted for our stay in the trench, so I blew my whistle and started back. I had seen Private Green, number 177250, knocked down by a bomb in the next trench section. and I picked him up and carried him out over the wrecked parapet. I took shelter with him in the first shell hole, but found that he was dead and left him there. A few yards further back toward our line, I found Lance Corporal Glass in a shell hole, with part of his hip shot away. He said he thought that he could get back if I helped him, and I started with him. Private Hunter, who had been in a neighboring shell hole, came to our assistance, and between us, Hunter and I got Glass to our front trench. We found them lining up the survivors of our party for a roll call that showed so many missing that Major John Lewis, our company commander, formerly managing editor of the Montreal Star, called for volunteers to go out into no man's land and try to find some of our men. Corporal Charleston, Private Saunders, and I went out. We brought in 2 wounded, and we saw a number of dead, but on account of their blackened faces, we were unable to identify them. The scouts later brought in several bodies. Of the 60-odd men that had started in our party, 43 were found to be casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. The missing list was the longest. The names of these men were marked MBK, missing, believed killed, on our rolls. I have learned since that some of them have been reported through Switzerland as prisoners of war in Germany, but most of them are now officially listed as dead. All the survivors of the raiding party were sent 20 miles to the rear at 7 o'clock, and the non-commissioned officers were ordered to make reports in writing concerning the entire operation. We recorded each in his own way the ghastly failure of our first aggressive effort against the Germans, before we rolled into the hay in the same old barn where we had been quartered during the days of preparation for the raid. I was so dead tired that I soon fell asleep, but not for long. I never slept more than an hour at a time, for several days and nights. I would doze off from sheer exhaustion and then suddenly find myself sitting straight up, scared half to death all over again. There may be soldiers who don't get scared when they know they're in danger, or even when people are being killed right around them, but I'm not one of them, and I've never met any of them yet. I know a boy who won the military medal in the Battle of the Somme, and I saw him on his knees before his platoon commander, shamelessly crying that he was a coward and begging to be left behind, just when the order to advance was given. Soldiers of our army who read this story will probably observe one thing in particular, and that is the importance of bombing operations in the present style of warfare. You might say that a feature of this war had been the renaissance of the grenadier. Only British reverence for tradition kept the name of grenadiers alive, through a considerable number of wars. Now in every offensive, big or small, the man who has been trained to throw a bomb 30 yards is busier and more important than the fellow with the modern rifle, which will shoot a mile and a half and make a hole through a house. In a good many surprising ways, this war has carried us back to first principles. I remember a Crusader's mace, which I once saw in the British Museum, that would make a bang-up knob carry, much better than the kind with which they arm our number 4 men in a raiding party section. It had a round iron head with spikes all over it. I wonder if they haven't started a factory to turn them out. As I learned in my special training in England, the use of hand grenades was first introduced in warfare by the French in 1667. The British did not use them until 10 years later. After the Battle of Waterloo, the hand grenade was counted as an obsolete weapon until the Japanese revived its use in the war with Russia. The rude grenades, first used by the British in the present war, weighed about 8 pounds. Today in the British Army, the men who have been trained to throw grenades, now of lighter construction and much more efficient in certain action, are officially known as bombers for this reason. When grenade fighting came back to its own in this war, each battalion trained a certain number of men in the use of grenades, and naturally called them grenadiers. The British Grenadier Guards, a senior foot regiment in the British Army, made formal complaint against the use of their time-honored name in this connection, and British reverence for tradition did the rest. The grenadiers are no longer grenadiers, but they are undoubtedly the grenadiers. The War Office issued a formal order that the battalion grenade throwers should be known as bombers and not as grenadiers. Up to the time when I left France, we had some 27 varieties of grenades, but most of them were obsolete or ineffective, and we only made use of 7 or 8 sorts. The grenades were divided into 2 principal classes, rifle grenades and hand grenades. The rifle grenades are discharged from a rifle barrel by means of a blank cartridge. Each grenade is attached to a slender rod which is inserted into the bore of the rifle, and the longer the rod, the greater the range of the grenade. The 3 principal rifle grenades are the Mills, the Hales, and the Newton, the former having a maximum range of 120 yards and the latter of 400 yards. A rifle discharging a Mills grenade may be fired from the shoulder, as there is no very extraordinary recoil, but in using the others it is necessary to fasten the rifle in a stand or plant the butt on the ground. Practice teaches the soldier how much elevation to give the rifle for different ranges. The hand grenades are divided also into 2 classes, those which are discharged by percussion and those which have time fuses with detonators of fulminate of mercury. The high explosives used are ammonal, ablist, and sabulite, but ammonals are much more commonly employed. There are also smoke bombs. the Mexican or Tunite bomb, the Hales hand grenade, the number 19 grenade, and the Fumite bomb, which contains a white phosphorus, wax, and petrol, and discharges a stream of liquid fire which will quickly burn out a dugout and everything it contains. Hand grenades are always thrown with a stiff arm, as a bowler delivers a cricket ball towards the wicket. They cannot be thrown in the same manner as a baseball for two reasons. One is that the snap of the wrist with which a baseball is sent on its way would be likely to cause a premature discharge of a percussion grenade, and the second is that the grenades weigh so much, from 1.5 pounds to 10 pounds, that the best arm in the world couldn't stand the strain of whipping them off as a baseball is thrown. I'm talking by the book about this because I've been a bomber and a baseball player. A bomber, besides knowing all about the grenades in use in his own army, must have practical working knowledge concerning the grenades in use by the enemy. After we took the Regina Trench on the Somme, we ran out of grenades in a moment, when a supply was vitally necessary. We found a lot of the German egg bombs, and through our knowledge of their workings and consequent ability to use them against the original owners, we were able to hold a position. An officer or non-commissioned officer in charge of a bombing detail must know intimately every man in his command, and have such discipline that every order will be carried out with scrupulous exactitude when the time comes. The leader will have no time in action to prompt his men, or even to see if they are doing what they have been told to do. When a platoon of infantry is in action, one rifleman more or less makes little difference. But in bombing operations, each man has certain particular work to do, and he must do it, just as it has been planned, in order to protect himself and his comrades from disaster. If you can outthrow the enemy, or if you can make most of the bombs land with accuracy, you have a wonderful advantage in an attack. But throwing wild or throwing short, you simply give confidence to the enemy in his own offensive. One very good thrower may win an objective for his squad, while one man who is faint-hearted or unskilled or rattled may cause the entire squad to be annihilated. In the revival of bombing, some tricks have developed which would be humorous if the denouements were not festooned with crepe and accompanied by obituary notations on muster rolls. There may be something which might be termed funny on one end of a bombing ruse, but not on both ends of it. Whenever you fool a man with a bomb, you're playing a practical joke on him that he'll never forget. Even probably he'll never get a chance to remember it. When the Canadians first introduced bombing, the bombs were improvised out of jam tins. The fuses were cut according to the taste and judgment of the individual bomber, and just when the bomb would explode was more or less problematical. Frequently, the Germans have tossed our bombs back into our trenches before they went off. That was injurious and irritating. They can't do that with a Mills grenade, nor with any of the improved factory-made bombs, because the men know just how they are timed and are trained to know just how to throw them. The Germans used to work another little bomb trick of their own. They learned that our scouts and raiders were all anxious to get a German helmet as a souvenir. They put helmets on the ground in no man's land, or in an advanced trench with bombs under them. In several cases, men looking for souvenirs suddenly became mere memories themselves. In several raids when bombing was new, the Canadians worked a trick on the Germans with extensively fatal effect. They tossed bombs into the German trenches with 6-inch fuses attached. The Germans had looked just like the other bombs we had been using, and in fact they were, all but the fuses. Instead of having failed to continue burning as the Germans thought, those fuses had never been lighted. They were instantaneous fuses. The ignition spark will travel through an instantaneous fuse at the rate of about 30 yards a second. A German would pick up one of these bombs, select the spot where he intended to blow up a few of us with our own ammonal, and then light the fuse. After that, there had to be a new man in his place. The bomb would explode instantly the long fuse was ignited. The next day when I got up from this disastrous raid, I said to my bunkie, "Got a fag?" Fag is the Tommy's name for a cigarette. It's never will you have a fag, but always have you got a fag. They are inseparable companions of the men at the front, and you'll see the soldiers go over the top with an unlit fag in their lips. Frequently it is still there when their work is done. As we sat there smoking, my friend said, "Something sure raised hell with our calculations. Like those automatic, self-cocking revolvers did with the Kentucky wedding." When someone made a remark reflecting on the bride, I replied. It may be interesting to note that Corporal Glass, Corporal Charleston, and Private later Corporal Saunders have all since been killed in action. Charleston and Saunders the same morning I was wounded on the Somme, and Glass Easter morning at Vimy Ridge when the Canadians made their wonderful attack.